employee value proposition. It's been a big topic of debate so far this year. Claire, what have you seen in the market so far?
Wow, well, I suppose the obvious trend is just that it's being talked about so much. And actually, I would say in probably every candidate conversation that I'm having with chief people officers, heads of HR, it's very much in that first introductory conversation. And that's not something we saw probably 3+ years ago. Definitely seeing some trends around people coming out of bigger organisations, really sort of rethinking their own purpose, their drivers, what's important to them, looking at potentially smaller organisations. What about in the FS world?
Yeah, I think it's a massive topic for us. So financial services, if I kind of break it down into sort of two big parts, you've got the big banking institutions, and I think the challenge that them businesses have is because they've got these really established brands, so the perception in the market is they know these big institutions very well before you kind of even consider moving there. So actually to influence your EVP is more challenging than, say, a startup or a boutique. And I think you only have to look at kind of some of the behaviours of the bigger banks around kind of how they really brought people back into the office, which has had a big bearing on individuals' motivations, probably that identity of what they view their business to look like. And I think if you look at the small boutiques, they've really picked up the opportunity to attract talent into their organisations because they're able to come up with really creative benefits, for example, and some creative ideas. But it's interesting, conversely, where we are in the market is that actually what candidates really want at the moment. They want to work in a secure, well-paid competitive environment where they're really inspired by the people that they work with. And actually that's probably why the banks and some of the more established institutions have actually done better in this market than maybe some of the small boutiques, as we've seen. I interviewed an HR director last week, actually, a CPO, and she was saying, who's worked in both large and small, and she said, it's all well and good having a Prosecco tap in your business, but there's no point in having a Prosecco tap if your job's at risk, or in fact you may not have a job. And I think we've seen that probably linking quite well into your world, into the tech sector, Nick. I mean, how do you think that compares to, because we've obviously seen like big firms like sort of Meta and firms that have really kind of suffered.
When we first came out of COVID, actually the whole safety piece came into kind of the equation where small organisations, had to turn the lights off. Not all of them made it through the pandemic, and actually I thought that was going to be a real push for the big blue chips, really attracting people back into those environments. And I think it has to a degree. I think it's going to be really interesting with some of the pin-up organisations that you mentioned in the tech space who had these gold-plated EVP kind of strategies and brands that didn't really treat people very well. And they were organisations that always threw on the sushi and the massages in the office, and actually when it mattered, they let their people down. And probably compared to the banks a little bit after the GFC, where the banks had a bit of a torrid time for a while, that people didn't trust those organisations. People didn't really want to work for them. They weren't proud to say where they worked, and actually I think the banks have done a really good job to slowly build up that trust. It's going to be really interesting to see what some of those tech businesses do next, because I think COVID left a mark on everybody. And I think safety, security, goodwill are all kind of big themes.
There's a big point around leaders sort of practicing what they preach. I don't know how that, like certainly in banking and in fact, a lot of the private equity firms where you've got this big community of partners that are claiming they want everyone back in, but they're not prepared to come in to the office more than one day a week. And actually firms are losing that identity in that direction. So actually there's that inspiration that there's a quote again, in order to get your EVP absolutely spot on, you need to know what the 25-year-olds want. And I think there's a big disconnect in some of the more traditional sectors like FS, where the partners are of a point in their career where they're just so out of touch and they don't know what the next generation is looking for. And the loyalty, the commitment, we're seeing people move more frequently because they just haven't got that connection, really.
I think I'm hearing from CPOs that actually the generation coming into the workplace now, they're not seeing purpose-led initiatives as perks or nice to haves. they're hygiene factors. You know, people expect it, and it's not just about having your values on the wall. It's, you know, they want to see how they're being lived and breathed.
Yeah.
I think we're being challenged even more in the search space of being a real extension to an organisation in telling their story, and how do they treat people, where are they at in their journey around inclusivity, what's their mission, what's their purpose, what are they trying to achieve, and that's been woven into our recruitment process a lot more over the last 5
And isn't
years.
it so much better when you're searching for a client to be able to have all that knowledge and that ammunition to go out to market?
Yeah.
It's so much easier when you really believe in it as well.
Yeah. And I think all this is added into the biggest challenge, that we've gone from 24 months of really high volume market, a really attractive platform to move, to that within 5 minutes flip on its head, where it's a really passive driven market. So the more sort of risk averse kind of individuals that we know in our networks will not move unless everything absolutely hits the mark. And I think there's a big obvious disconnect and gap within a lot of sectors where firms aren't really they haven't really measured up, and they're not sort of talking the talk really. They've really kind of got a huge amount of challenges and issues to kind of close the gap on.
I think if we take last year as a really, I mean, last year we've never seen anything like it in the recruitment market, and we, you know, a lot of clients have said to us, I bet you guys had a brilliant time last year, and it was a strange market to recruit in, wasn't it? The first half of the year, it was everything was about cash. You know, salaries was a massive motivation. You know, people, you know, were really keen to move to kind of see the financial upside. I think
Lots of very quick decisions, not particularly well thought through. Maybe.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, and I think that's coming out of the wash now in terms of people who maybe made the wrong move, etc. I think the second half though was around, you know, people trying to balance that versus, do I believe in where this organisation's going? What's their strategy? What's their financial health? And I think we saw that in the diligence of some of the moves we were making in the second half of the year.
I've found definitely for a few searches I've worked on recently, people are doing much more due diligence on the leaders of the business.
Yeah.
What kind of profile do they have? Yeah. What are they talking about in terms of purpose? So you can make a real impact, you know, getting your kind of senior leadership team, your partnership team to have a presence, to have some kind of social brand, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it's a less of a fickle world. I mean, I'll quote Shireen Daniels here around organisations are being held to account to cashing in the receipts of, you know, all these amazing awards, best place to work, etc. Missions, values, PR agencies have made them look amazing, but actually, particularly in HR search, these candidates and individuals want to scrutinise that, and actually being authentic to say this is where we are and this is where we want to go is seen as a much more positive than, you know, we're perfect. This is you know, everything's right.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think psychological safety is an element that we're seeing. Perhaps people's, as I say, risk has dropped to move. So getting that comfort around, does the business really know its direction? Are they kind of bought into where ultimately my career is going to be, rather than, as we've said before, a few quirky benefits and things that are kind of seemingly nice to have. So I think a lot of people, going back to the point, want that security. They want to get paid competitively, and they want to be working with the best people in the market. That's where I feel in financial services that SME market has held up very, very strong. So a lot of the investment managers that we work with have got that tenure behind them, but they're still of a size where they've got agility and they've got ability to move and have that flexibility than some of the bigger institutions that are sort of signposts to be quite almost like sort of oil tankers really, in terms of their abilities to turn and move forward. So I think there's probably a gap there that we're seeing more movement from a talent acquisition and HR perspective, and also people having the opportunity to have more influence in that space as well, which I think is kind of a positive I'm seeing as well.
And when you're, you know, when you're brought into a search with a client, and, you know, if you're both invested and you spend that time at the beginning of the process putting together your documentation, really understanding the reason for the role, the content of the role, etc., it just allows for a much smoother process, doesn't it? Because we are really that then extension of, you know, being able to talk about the journey, the EVP with kind of candidates.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing as well, again, actions speak louder than words, and I think EVP, in my mind, has kind of come on a long way. A bit like sort of just values when they first came into the market. They were just a few lovely words on the wall, and I think EVP was very much that particular concept many years ago. And we're now seeing, as HR has evolved, in fact, I think since the pandemic, we spoke about it yesterday, that HR has really risen in stock in most organisations. So now it's an opportunity to really influence, and CEOs are having to sort of step back and go, if we don't take this seriously now, we're going to really be, losing great people, we won't attract the people we need, and we won't get that diversity of thinking, which I think has become absolutely sort of crucial in the market. So I think it's a great platform now. I think it's a great opportunity, but we're seeing the firms that are taking this seriously are the ones, no coincidence, the ones that are attracting the very best in the market, versus the ones we know that are not.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I saw on a post a couple of weeks ago, the HR leader of P&O was talking about, obviously P&O went through some quite public challenges a couple of years ago, talking around the power of social media, and actually, him and his team had received huge amounts of abuse on platforms like LinkedIn, etc. And I think, that public scrutiny organisations and individuals have at a senior level now has never been higher.
No.
And I think that's a good and a bad thing as well. I mean, certainly, never condone kind of publicly people being called out. Ultimately, they're doing their jobs.
Yeah.
The HR leadership team are following the agenda of a senior management team, therefore shouldn't be held fully accountable to the good and bad and indifference. But that level of scrutiny around, do organisations live and breathe through their values?
Yeah.
And are they there in the good and the bad? And again, I kind of always go back to kind of COVID having an impact. I think it made everybody step up and think differently.
I think we've got a duty almost to educate clients,
Yeah.
and show them what good looks like, because we're seeing it every single day. I think last year we made more CPO hires in, I think, the firm's record, across some of the most fast-growing companies, and that are attracting some really great talent. And I think it's good that we're able to sort of take that message to market, that we're leading the charge, really, and we're seeing it firsthand.
It's not about painting a perfect picture. Actually, most senior HR leaders know they're going to be going into an organisation that's going to have a degree of challenges, things that aren't right, things that need to be moved down.
They want a challenge.
Half the time, that's the excitement of the job. If it was all perfect, no one would want the role. But it's around evidencing and being articulate about where they are and where do they want to go.
Yeah, being authentic.
A key theme,
Yeah.
it?
And I think the commercial impact now, from certainly when I joined Fraser Jones 9 years ago, to, if I look at private equity, for example, which dips into a few of the sectors that we've covered, I think the fact that the sort of CPO sort of model is now linked into the portfolio businesses has really opened up some big ticket commercial levers. So I know we're talking about EVP, but look at ESG, for example, where actual investors need to see this. They need to see what is your EVP, not because it's a nice to have, but actually fundamentally we're not going to invest in you as a business. So it's really,
it's not acceptable.
Well, it's not acceptable, and actually we need to know not just the headline. We really need to lift the bonnet on this and know the ins and outs, and that's really sobered the mind of every single private equity firm. And there's been a great opportunity for HR.
I think whether you're a consumer business and you have to be able to tell a story about your brand and actually that you're leaving a positive mark in society and the world, are really, really key. I think ultimately to attract and retain the generational talent we're going to see over the next kind of decade, people aren't going to stay in the same job for long.
No.
That's one thing.
Well, the world's got smaller, hasn't it, really?
Absolutely. So I think how these organisations are going to evolve, how are they going to talk about impact, how they're going to measure it in much more of a tangible way. They're all going to be challenges. No doubt that HR will be part of solving. I don't think HR are the only function that are going to be involved in that, but they're certainly going to have to help build the infrastructure to do that.